How's it going, everybody? I think we'll get started. We got about 20 or so people here, so that's a good number to get going. Hope everyone had a good week, staying healthy, staying safe, staying active, like we talked about last week. This week, I want to talk about progressions and recovery, how, the why, and the when to safely progress and then recover after we make those progressions. So last week, we laid out how to build your basic workout, and now today, I want to talk about how we're going to progress those workouts to get you a little bit better, a little bit fitter, and a little bit healthier. Let's get rolling. So what does a progression mean? Every type of training requires progression in order to get better. When we're talking about resistance training, like weightlifting, we need to progress at each workout in some fashion, or else we will not get better. If you do an exercise at the exact same weight, the same sets, and the same reps, you will not make any sort of meaningful change in your routines. And it will not make you any better on the field. For cardiovascular health as well, obviously as we age, our capacity will decrease slightly. So this is somewhat of a sliding scale. And obviously in athletic pursuits, we must progress to make gains on the field, the court, in the pool, or whatever sport you're participating in. Let's talk about strength training a little bit here. So who is able to safely strength train? And the answer is everyone. Some of the feedback we got last week about the first session was it seemed more geared towards high school kids, which I understand because I didn't preface in saying that this goes into pretty much everyone's training. At Centercourt, we start with kids on the strength and conditioning side as young as around 8, and then we kind of progress from there. So the myth that resistance training is bad for young kids is just that. It's a complete myth. Resistance training not only doesn't stunt your growth, it actually stimulates it. It's something called Wolff's Law. You can think about it in an easy example would be for like a baseball player. Why do they get calluses on their palms? It's because every time they swing the bat is rubbing on that section of the palm over and over and over again. The body senses this and it stimulates more skin cell growth in that area to guard against any damage. So resistance training is the same thing for the joints and muscles and the bones as well. It actually stimulates growth. And the earlier we start with kids, the better the results are in the future. When we learn the basics at a young age, we reduce the risk of injury as we get older. Old dogs and new tricks kind of thing, right? So we want to teach them as young as we possibly can in a safe, productive manner. So what to consider when assessing how to train? This is whenever I have any sort of parent meeting with any of our athletes, this is something that comes up a lot. Is it safe to strength train with my kid? And this is basically how we and my staff assess who gets to train with weights and who doesn't. Training age is the length of time that a person has been resistance training with proper coaching, and that is paramount. It is the with. If you're doing it without proper coaching, if I get a 16-year-old who comes in and says he goes to Equinox 7 days a week by himself, consider his training age to be 0. And I would assess him and work with him based on that training age of 0. Physical age is obviously how old the person actually is, whether it's 10 or 16. And then mental age, how mature is this person? And this is possibly the biggest factor when it comes to strength training, because you need to be able to take proper coaching and take what we're doing seriously. You can hurt yourself. It's just inherent when it comes to strength training that if you're not doing it properly and if you're messing around and you're not able to take the coaching, things can happen. So once we assess those variables, those 3 variables, we're going to drop someone in our strength and conditioning pathway. This link is in the chat box, but I'm going to click on it here in a minute and it'll take us to that sheet. And the 2 examples we're going to use is number 1, we'll look at a 16-year-old female with 2 years coaching experience versus a 16-year-old female with no experience. And then number 2 will just be a 10-year-old with 2 years experience. So they started working when they were 8, and then a 10-year-old without. And we'll just basically see what that kind of does. This brings us to our strength and conditioning pathway sheet, which is basically a tool I use when I'm training my staff to basically teach them the proper place to put people. All right, so we'll keep it simple. Obviously, there's lots of stuff on here, but we'll just do the complex leg. So within a complex leg, our progressions, we'll look at bilateral and we'll look at a squat. Squat is something that I think most of us can visualize in terms of what the exercise is. But we also have hip hinges, stiff leg deadlifts, and straight leg deadlifts. So that first example, the 16-year-old, right? We had, figure out how to get these boxes out of here. Here we go. A 16-year-old with 2 years of training. So this is the end of the line here, this bar loading blue section. So with a 16-year-old with 2 years of training, I'm going to assume that we can drop them right into anything that's in that blue without much problem. I would do an initial assessment to make sure, but then I'd be pretty confident putting them in to that straight up barbell back squat. Now, I know that because of their training age, and I know that because of their physical age. She's 16 years old. She's matured to the point that her body can safely handle all of this stuff, and she's been training for 2 years, so she should be able to do these things. Let's say after a few sessions, I see that she is not a mentally mature person, does not take things seriously, likes to mess around. I'm probably going to drop her back into this green section here, either a goblet squat or a double goblet squat. Now, the 16-year-old with any training, age-wise, she's going to be sitting somewhere in this green section as well. Training-wise, obviously, that's why I'm dropping her back from the blue down into the green section. Now, she shows me that she's extremely mature and gets and understands coaching. She could quickly move up to that blue section just because her physical age is there and the mental age is there. So it's how those three variables kind of play against each other. Now, if we think about a 10-year-old with 2 years training experience, I'm probably going to be pretty safe putting them in the initial green section here, which is the goblet squat. Goblet squat, we're just holding a kettlebell or a dumbbell up on our chest. I would start them in a light position and basically see how they move. Same 10-year-old with no training experience, we're all the way back in this yellow and we're just doing body weight stuff. Now, if that 10-year-old shows me that they're very mentally mature, they make good decisions when it comes to being in the weight room, we can obviously move them pretty quickly up to our goblet squats and our double goblet squats. Most 10-year-olds are never going to make it into this blue section. It's just impossible for them physically to be able to move that kind of weight. There have been a few exceptions. I did train a 10-year-old a few years ago who was at 10 years old, taller and weighed more than me. And he was a big boy and he was very, very strong. What the purpose of showing you this is to basically say that whether it be a 10-year-old or a 16-year-old, probably the biggest factor is going to be their mental maturity, their ability to take instructions, their ability to make decisions and focus on what we're doing. And that's really going to determine where we end up putting them within this pathway. Go back to the presentation here. What's next? We know we are starting with someone. Now, how do we progress from there? So here are the other variables, and these are just 7 of them. There are more, but I'm going to try to keep it as not complicated as possible. So obviously, the first thing we have to mess around with is the exercises. Which exercises do we choose, and how do we choose them? We just went over how I'm going to choose what exercise I'm going to use for what kids. Changing those exercises is a variable that we can use to make progress. Frequency, the amount of days that we're actually training. Duration, the amount of time that we spend during that training. And then the load, which is the amount of weight that we are lifting. Now, under load, we have sets, reps, and time under load. Sets, it's how many times we're repeating an exercise within a workout. In the workout last week, I said 3 to 4 sets, so each exercise would be done 3 to 4 times. Reps is the amount of time we perform something happened. Yeah, the amount of time we perform the exercise within a given set. So it'll be 10 reps within one set. Doing 4 sets, you'll end up doing 40 of any given exercise there. And then time under load is how long the rep lasts. This is probably one that is used the least, but it is one that makes a huge amount of difference. We don't want to be doing things too fast. We want to make sure they're under control. Then we can also play with it where we're making a particular exercise last pretty long. So we'll go back to our pathway sheet, and I'll walk you through how we would change an exercise as a way to progress. And then I'll also show you a little video on this. So in case you don't know what any of these are, you'll be able to see that in a second. All right, so we'll look at a press progression. That's when we're pushing something away from us. We have vertical presses, we have flat presses, and decline. We'll look at the flat here. Obviously, our basic motion on a flat press is going to be our push-ups. This is something that anyone can do at any age, but it's also something that we can make more difficult, even if we're a bit older, to make them progress. We can do push-ups with accents. Negative means we're just focusing on the down motion, so from the up to the down. But accent that with time, 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 8 seconds. We could have elevation or add resistance, and then we can do unstable. That would be like pressing off of a BOSU, which if you don't know what that is, you'll see in a minute when I show the video. Once we progress off of there, we would be looking at dumbbell flat presses and dumbbell incline presses. And then finally finishing with the barbell flat, a barbell incline. So within that, if 1 week or 1 month you're doing a dumbbell flat press and you just want to progress to the next one, it would go into a barbell flat or a barbell incline press. So that's just an easy way to progress in exercise. Got the full screen here. And we'll show you just a quick little video here. So this is that same progression we just talked about, and just so you can see what they look like. Our standard push-up in a modified position, which we showed last week. These are bent. Standard push-up. Negative push-ups, we're focusing on a 5-second down. And we drop the knees and raise ourselves back up. These are pretty brutal exercise. If you've not done them, they're great. Adding our resistance band, another way to progress. This is the unstable off of our BOSU. Elevated. I do those off of my knuckles. It's just because it hurts my wrists. Flat press with a dumbbell, I always teach kids with feet up. I feel it just gives them a little more core. And then incline with dumbbells. Moving on to the barbell. Flat, again, I have my feet up. And then that incline. Same motion. Driving from the chest straight through and up. And there we go. So that's just the way within those variables to exercise how we're going to make a progression. You can work your way straight up that from push-ups straight to barbell presses, and that would be your progression. So frequency. How often am I training? So what do I want to know? What am I training for? If it's general fitness, two days a week of resistance training is probably going to be enough for just someone looking for general fitness. Athletics, looking at 2 to 4 days a week of full body training like we talked about last week. This will vary based on in-season and out-of-season requirements. I wouldn't want someone doing 4 days of total body work in the middle of baseball season or track season or anything like that. Bodybuilding, if you're into that, I'm not sure if we have anybody out there who is. These guys can train up to 5 to 7 days a week. Power lifters is around 3 to 4 days, and these guys are usually based on cycles working up to a competition, and then Olympic lifting. And powerlifting is deadlift, press, and squat. Those are the really big guys that you see at the Olympics. And then the Olympic lifting is the snatch, the clean, and the jerk. Those are the smaller guys that you see on the Olympics, and they're throwing the bar above their head. They'll generally do 4 to 5 days a week, and again, it's based on cycles. They kind of cycle up and then they cycle back down, depending on when their competitions are. So duration. Again, you got to come back to the question: what is it you're training for? A distance runner is going to train very differently than a sprinter. And that is just because the load that you're putting on during a distance run is very different than a sprinter. If you look at marathon runners versus the Olympic sprinters, they have very different body styles. They have very different body types. It's a little bit of the chicken or egg question. Is the person who is a distance runner like that because of running, or are they good at running because they're built like that? I tend to think it's the former, meaning that distance runners are kind of, they have a body style, and the ones that are good at it are going to have that particular body style. Whereas a sprinter is going to be a more muscular person, larger, they get those really, really big thighs. And that's because they need to be more powerful and speedier. So the way that we would train them would be very different. Like the time under load. So like if we're doing, let's go back to the squat, because again, I think if everyone knows what a squat looks like. For a distance runner, I would train them a bit longer. I would make their sets, or actually I would make their reps a bit longer, because we're trying to get that muscle to fatigue in a much longer span of time. So we're working on endurance within that muscle. Whereas with the sprinter, we'd be doing faster, quicker reps to mimic, again, what it is they're training for. All right, so load, and then under that set reps, and then time under load. Load, we will have a physical ceiling we can hit for any given exercise. Obviously, not everyone's going to be able to get up to, you know, 1,000-pound squat. So you're going to hit your own physical limit. But just so you look at some examples here of kind of how we would play with things. In general fitness, a person wants to progress a squat. Again, we'll come back to this. Ask the pathway, meaning they've already gotten to the point where they're doing a barbell squat. They've made it all the way from that yellow through the green and into that blue section. And that's pretty much as far as you can go with the squat. So they're currently doing 3 sets of back squats in a workout with 10 reps and a 2-2 time under load, meaning 2 seconds on the down, 2 seconds on the up. And the load they're working with is 200 pounds. The first manipulation we could do is add load. This means generally we're going to drop the number of reps kind of on a sliding scale. So if we went up to 215 pounds on their next set, we might drop them from 10 reps down to 8. Again, because when we're talking about these big complex motions, we always want to keep form as the number one. If we're breaking form, that's when we can get hurt. So we want to make sure we're hitting the ceiling on that 8th rep at that 215 pounds. We're still holding form. Another way is to add just another set to the workout. We're still doing 10 reps, let's say. We keep it at 200 pounds, but now we add one more set. And then adding more reps per set at a steady weight. So let's say we're doing, again, the 10 reps. Maybe in the next workout next week, we're going to do 12 reps, still at that 3 sets, gone up additional 6 reps for the workout. And then we can adjust the time under load to 3-3. So that's 3 seconds on the down, 3 seconds on the up. This is, for me, one of my favorite ways to manipulate and make progression, because if you're working at a 2-2, change it to a 3-3. That's 2 extra seconds for that single rep. On 10 reps, it's an additional 20 seconds under load. So just think about you're doing a set of 10 squats. Now think about doing that an additional 20 seconds. And if you're fatigued at 10 reps, maybe we're dropping it now that we're at a 3-3, because the muscles are working a lot longer. Fatigue's going to set on a bit quicker. So that's a really fun way to mess around with your workouts. Just change how long you're doing that particular rep within the set. All right, so our in-home workout from last week, this is the basic way to work on progressions without getting super complicated with all the time under load, with all the sets and things like that. This is how I would progress what I gave you guys last week. So a reverse lunge, let's say we're going to add weight. So let's say we have 10-pound dumbbells, so that's 20 pounds. We're starting at 10 reps. Once we can complete 12 reps with that 20 pounds, we would add weight and go back to 10. So we would go from 10-pound dumbbells to 15. And we're going to start at that 10 reps. We're able to make the 10 reps. Next week we do 11, or the next day we do 11. Next day after that, we're able to get to the 12, add weight again. And it's just kind of lather, rinse, repeat there. Donkey kick will be the exact same thing. We just increase the resistance because it's a banded exercise. Start at the 12 or start at 10 when you can complete 12, add more resistance. Obviously with the resistance bands, we're gonna hit a ceiling there. So that's when we can start playing with like time under load. With the push-ups, we would progress the positions and increase the resistance. Start at 10 reps. Once we can get up to 12, add more resistance or progress the position that you're doing. If you're in the modified position, we're able to get to 12 reps for 3 sets. We should be able to progress to standard push-up at that point. We would have to play around with the reps, maybe drop them down to 5 or 6, and then work our way up to that 12, and then we can go into resistance push-up. Banded row, we're going to progress the position on the banded row, which means I'm going to step back or add other band to it. Same deal, start at 10. Once we can make it to 12, increase the reps or the resistance. Plank, obviously we're just going to be able to increase the time there. You never want to do a weighted plank because that's just going to put your back in a compromised position. And then the pull-off press, we would increase the time under load and then progress the position, meaning we would take a step further out or add more resistance bands. Good. So what's next? We have done a particular workout for about a month. We have played with all of those different variables. What do we do next? Change the workout and start over and progress from there. So next week, I'll be presenting you guys with the next kind of phase of workouts. If you choose, you can continue with the initial workout for an entire month and play around with those progressions within there, or you can take up the new workout that I'll be presenting next week. And that's just the way, again, physically we will hit the limits on particular exercises where we're just not going to be able to do more. And as we go, our body gets used to that position, used to that motion, and we do want to change those, change basically the thing that the body is feeling, basically. So if we're doing a lunge, right, that's that unilateral single side focused on the quads and the hamstrings. Maybe next month we want to change that position up, go bilateral, focus more on the quads and glutes. And it just changes the feedback that the body is getting. That's why if you do work out on your own and you start a new workout, you know, you read something in a magazine, you want to give it a try, you try that and all of a sudden the next day you're super sore. That is because bodies experience whole new motion. Everything is different, and that's when that soreness sets in. All right, let's move on to the recovery section of things. What to do and when to do it. Static stretching, only after exercise, never before. I still see this to this day. I drive by fields. I see coaches with their teams and they're out there doing static stretching before a match or before a game. Never static stretch before exercise. You need to be warmed up in order to do that. And if you do it cold, you increase the chances of pulled muscles out on the field or in the pool or on the court. Dynamic stretching, we can do this before exercise. So if you've ever been to a track meet or anything like that and you see the runners, they're swinging their legs back and forth on the fence, that's a form of dynamic stretching. Foam rolling or myofascial release, you can do this before and after exercise. And then trigger point release, we would do this generally after, but we can do it before on certain occasions. Generally, if we're trying to get someone with an injury a little bit more loose before they go out. So like take it, for example, like bicep tendonitis for like a baseball player or tennis player, or anyone who's doing overhead motions. Bicep tendonitis, that's that muscle right up here, is to get pretty inflamed. So we would do a trigger point release before they would go out to play, and that'll just help loosen that muscle up and get rid of some of that inflammation as they're trying to play their sport. All right, so we talked about last week, we talked about the active rest days. And what active rest means is just that. We recover, but we remain active while doing so. So what is it going to look like? We're looking at 20 to 30 minutes of light cardiovascular work, walking, hiking, biking. If you have machines at your house, like an elliptical or a stationary bike. And we're looking to raise our heart rates just slightly. This will be a sliding scale based on your age. Younger kids, we're going to be having to get it a little bit higher, whereas when we age, it's going to be a little bit lower. But basically, raising the heart rate just helps the body metabolize the lactic acid in our muscles. And the lactic acid is the thing that causes that soreness. We talked about last week how when we're strength training, we're actually ripping our muscles. And when we rip those muscles, lactic acid is released in this whole metabolic process that's too complicated to go into here. And it just kind of starts to get reused as we're training. Then as soon as we stop, it just kind of sits there. And that's what causes all that soreness in our body. So that's why it's very important when we're resting and recovering to still remain active. You don't want to just lay around on the couch. So following this 20 to 30 minutes of light cardiovascular work, I like to go into a full routine, including foam rolling, trigger point, and stretching. And we'll walk you through what that's going to look like here. Again, this link is in the chat page, so feel free to use this as your own. This is kind of a standard day that I would use with any of our athletes here for a full recovery. The rolling, we always want to start with the rolling and the trigger point before we go into the static stretching. Too complicated to go into why, but basically it's just the proper way to do it. So a glute roll, this is what the position looks like. We're kind of rolling over right on the center of that muscle, and we're rolling back and forth 30 seconds on each side. If you've never done this, first time doing it, it does hurt. Our IT roll, 30 seconds on each side. This is the standard position with the young lady's foot is on the ground to relieve some of the weight. As you get better at it, you stack this foot on top, and that just gets a little bit deeper into the muscles. Quad roll. I do this one generally on my elbows. I think up on the hands, you're just going to get a little bit tired. We're working from upper hip all the way down towards the knees, up and down, still on that 30 seconds or so. You change your toe position on this one, point your toes out, point your toes in, and that'll just hit those quads in slightly different positions. Quads, they're called quads because there's 4 of them. So you got 2 on the outside and then 2 in the center. So if you point your toes out, we're going to work on the inside muscles. You point your toes in, we're going to work on the outside muscles. It's good to get all. A calf roll, same deal, stacking those feet up, raise your butt up, and then you're rolling mid-calf down towards ankle. Play with the position of your toe, point it in, point it out. It's going to hit different sections of those muscles. Moving on to our trigger point. I generally use a lacrosse ball for all of these. This is not a lacrosse ball, but you get the idea. Generally, when I'm coaching a group, what I'm going to say is the ball right on the waistband of your pants. And you can see right there, that's kind of where that position is. The opposite leg comes up and out like a figure 4 to the side. It just puts additional pressure on here. And now this trigger point does is it basically tricks the muscle into relaxing. When you're injured or when you're sore from your workouts, your muscles will tighten up. And this just uses a mechanism within your body to basically trick the muscle into thinking it's being stretched too much, and then it relaxes to avoid injury. So this trigger point will just help with that process. I want to hold this for about a minute. This one's pretty painful. The next one is generally worse. This is our lateral hip. And again, waistband of the pants, I would use a lacrosse ball. I think this ball is just a little bit too big. And that bottom leg would be straight, ideally. That's usually the most painful one that kids report, and athletes report. Pectoral, you can see the ball is right in the crease of the shoulder. So between our shoulder and our pec, we're finding that kind of depression. And we're going to hold that position in there. Arm behind the back to start. And then I like to bring the arm out to 90 degrees to the side. You can also do this one up against a wall if you want to get a little more pressure. And we're making small little rolling motions. You find a spot that really hurts, kind of hold on it for about 20 to 30 seconds till it goes away, and then progress and find a different spot. Step. Again, I would use a lacrosse ball. I generally do this one on a wall, but with this photo, we're doing it on the floor. And we're looking to be in the center of the bicep and then roll up towards the shoulder. Center of the bicep towards the shoulder. Anyone in an overhead sport, this is key. Got to be doing this one. You got to be working on those biceps. Get over tightened very, very quickly. Posterior capsule. You can see here, this is just below the shoulder, but not quite down on your lat. To be done up against the wall or on the floor if you're brave. This one can hurt again. This will tie in right with the bicep. If we're having trouble with your biceps, work on that posterior capsule as well. That will add additional relief. And we'll move into our static stretching with our large orange band that was on that equipment list from last week. I would use that one. Ideally, we're looking for that opposite leg to be nice and straight, the hips flat, and that knee straight. Only go as high as you can with your knee straight. And always do this laying down, and never do the seated one where you're kind of reaching forward. We don't want to round the back when we're stretching our hamstrings. Adductors, these are just the muscles on the inside of the leg. Same position here, we're just going to drop that leg out to the side. Keeping that opposite leg with that toe pointed up, and that left hip stays on the ground, vice versa when you switch to the other side. Kneeling hip flexor, this is my personal favorite stretch. Foot will be elevated up on a bench or a chair. If you're at home, make sure you have a mat under your knee. And basically we're trying to drive those hips forward while the chest stays in position. We don't want to lean forward. You can use PVC pipe or a broom or something in the right hand on this particular stretch if you're having trouble with your balance, or do it next to a wall. Next one is called a Spider-Man. This is a hamstring stretch. Ideally, I would like to see him with his right arm reaching that elbow towards the ground there. Just gets a little bit deeper into the hamstring. Pigeon stretch. We have ideally our shin is perpendicular to our body as we lay across the top. If you're tight in your hips, this is a great one to work on. And your shin will not be parallel if you're tight in your hips when you first start this. And then our calf stretch. Hanging off the stairs, hanging off a block, anything like that. Ideally, we would have the single leg down. I would hold that for about 30 seconds, about 20 seconds or so. Then you're going to rotate your body away from that leg. So this is a left leg. So then her body would rotate to the right. And that's basically just going to take the stretch from the center of the calf and then bring it to the outside. Really good stretch as well. Pectoral stretch. This is our chest muscle, and he's doing this against a wall. I know it's kind of whited out there. But any doorway in your house works perfect. Arm up at 90 degrees, step in and rotate away. And we're looking for the stretch right in that pectoral muscle there. And then our bicep, again, we can do this off the side of the couch, in your house, or a countertop, perhaps. We can go palm up or palm down. This one is in the palm up position. And you just want to basically maintain a good posture. Just lift your chest up nice and tall, and that'll get right into that bicep. And then our latissimus stretch. This you can also do against a wall. You would just, if I'm doing my left arm, I would go to the left-hand side of the doorway, grab on with the backhand position, drop your chest down, and then look underneath your arm. That's a great stretch for the back. So this would be your basic full recovery day. Hits all your major muscle groups, gets through all of the things we need released at any given time in our training. If you have a particular sport where you're incurring more stress on one particular part of your body, again, like overhead sports with the bicep, you might spend a little more time working on those biceps and posterior capsule. If you're a runner, you might spend more time on your abs pulling and stretching, because those tend to be the things that are going to get the most tight. All right. And that'll basically be it. So let me check out the chat here, see if you guys have any questions. Screen here. Still learning how to do all this, guys. Apologize. All right, so feel free to drop anything in there if you have any questions. Give it a couple seconds here. I'm just seeing there is only one link here. Someone just asked where we can find the recovery. So let me put that one in again for you guys. I'll put that in now. There you go. That's the recovery document there. All right, last call for any questions. All right, everybody. I guess everyone, I guess I was clear enough that nobody had any questions. If you have anything, where's the link for the workout progressions? That's the top one up here, all the way at the top. I put it up at 351. If you guys have any questions during the week, always feel free to reach out to me. It's Tim at centercourtclub.com. Happy to take any questions. Happy to answer anything and help guide you guys through this crazy time we're living. Beyond that, everyone enjoy their week, stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Take care.